the service. I hope that you find it meaningful. And if you're ever in the area, we'd absolutely love to have you join us here. I was the youngest in my family, and so when I talk about the pecking order in the vehicle, it's a sore point for me. Anyone else here? You were the youngest in your family? Look at us, bruised, damaged goods. I always had to sit in the middle on the back seat. Older brother, older sister, and I grew up in a very happy family, a very loving family, but we were a family of modest means. And I remember one year going on holiday to stay with family down in the Cape, and we were from Joburg, obviously. I remember driving in my dad's Golf 1. It was not even an LS, it was just an L. It had no headrests, and it was a lime green color. And I remember sitting in the back seat of that car between my brother and my sister for hours and hours and hours on end, all the way to visit family. And then, of course, you have a lovely holiday, but in the back of your mind, you're already scheming as this long trip going back. I remember the one year my dad, who was not, he was a wonderful father, but I wouldn't describe him as an incredibly sophisticated person. But the one year he got an opera CD. Not a CD, sorry, an audio cassette. A CD, my word, no chance. And he made us listen to this thing for hours on end. And if my brother or my sister ever visit here at church, ask them what happened to that audio cassette, because it's still a mystery. It never came back from Mossel Bay. We suspect. I think my brother watches the online service, so he's probably having a good laugh now. Jesus is convicting him of that. The thing is, there's usually a pecking order when you're traveling in a car. In fact, got me thinking, there's often a pecking order whenever there's seating involved. Weddings. Sometimes in the actual ceremony, sometimes in the reception. There's a pecking order. People know where to sit, more or less. And then I thought of even large scale, even sort of like a political rally. There's a pecking order. Only certain people will sit in the front row of certain kinds of events. They tell me even in business meetings and around boardrooms, there's a pecking order around the table. And sometimes it's clear who's sitting in certain places. Their chair will be slightly bigger. I didn't understand all this kind of stuff till somebody described it to me. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So you know where you fit in the pecking order. That's the genius of pecking order. That's where it comes from. Is everybody settles into their zone or their station, and you know where you fit in. Where you sit matters. I sat on the back seat of that VW because I was the youngest, by quite some margin, by the way, so I was bullied. But you sit in a certain place, and where you sit matters, and where you sit says things about you. It reveals your station. It reveals your level of importance. That custom was prevalent in Jesus' day too. Here's our text for today. When Jesus noticed that all who had come to the dinner were trying to sit near the head of the table, he gave them this advice. If you are invited to a wedding feast, don't always head for the best seat. What if someone more respected than you has also been invited? The host will say, let this person sit here instead. Then you will be embarrassed and you'll have to take whatever seat is left at the foot of the table. Do this instead, Jesus says. Sit at the foot of the table. Then when the host sees you, he will come and say, friend, we have a better place for you than this. And then you will be honored in front of all the other guests. For the proud will be humbled, but the humble will be honored. So Jesus, in this actual setting that actually happened, because we believe this, we believe that Jesus lived an actual life, and much of what is recorded in the Gospels is straightforward history. It was an actual event. One day this conversation happened. He noticed that at a social setting, people were clamoring for certain seats. People were clamoring to get to a certain spot. And everybody wanted to be near the head of the table. And here's the reason why. Let me give you the cultural context. In these meetings or in these dinners, the closer you sat to the host of the meeting, the higher you were up the social ladder. The closer you were to the host, the more special or important you were in that particular setting. And so the sooner you could get in, the sooner you could get close to the host, the closer you sat to the host. Here's the thing. You sat close to the host, people go, ooh, I don't necessarily know him, but he's sitting right next to the host. Must be someone important. Must be somebody privileged. And I'm having a dinner party next week. If this person's important, I should invite them. I don't know who they are yet, but clearly. And so do you see this? It was a little game that people played. We don't play those kinds of games anymore. I mean, nobody does this kind of thing anymore. Nobody puts something on their social media to get likes. No, none of us do that. I mean, no one here. We're all, yes? Oh, do you think this kind of thing still happens? It happens all the time. It happens in social settings. I'm sure it happens in boardroom settings. I'm sure that sometimes people won't attend a meeting because they know they're not going to be seated where they want to be seated at that meeting, and they'll just be one of the plebs. And they'd rather not be there than be one of the plebs. The closer you sat to the host, the higher up the social ladder you were. And the higher up the social ladder you were, the more likely you were to be invited to the next dinner. And if you could get yourself nice and close to the host for that dinner, well, who knows? The sky's the limit. You might even end up one day being a host. It's what I want to call for today, and my message is entitled this. It's the upward spiral of self. Let me just put it on the screen there. It's the upward spiral of self. And it is a thing that is not foreign to any person in this room. It is a universally human condition, the upward spiral of self. The issue is that it gains momentum in our hearts, and it's exactly that Jesus was addressing here. The upward spiral of self, I think, is rampant in our world. Let me be very clear firstly. Every single person ever wants to be noticed. Everybody wants to feel special. Everybody wants to feel important. Every single person. That is part of it's the way we are wired. We want to be noticed, at least special, preferably important. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when that becomes an obsession or a driving force in our lives, it can become destructive, and it can become destructive like that. It can go from being a healthy, normal human thing to being something quite radical and outlandish. Let me give you an example quickly. There's a story of a door-to-door salesman. I did door-to-door sales for a while. I was lousy at it. I only sold enough to make commission to get down to Joburg, down to Cape Town from Joburg to visit Kirsten. That's it. I never even went back. But door-to-door sales, tough gig. But there's a story that is told of a door-to-door salesman who was average in every way. However, he was massively successful because he learned the power of one line. You see, what he would do is he would pitch his product to people, and of course they would decline. And just as they'd finished declining what he was selling, he would use this line. Okay, that's fine. To be honest, a few of your neighbors actually told me that you probably wouldn't be able to afford it. Listen, if you're in sales and you go out and use this and tell them you heard it in church and it's a good sales technique, that is not the point of this story at all. The point of this story is that pride is a powerful tool. And it can be leveraged, and it is leveraged often and all the time. And I think pride exists on the obsessive scale of the desire to be noticed, important, and special. I'm saying that's healthy, but I think it can tip over into something where we become susceptible to manipulation like this. Yes? I tell you, I don't know if that's a true story about that salesman, but yes, when I read the story, I thought it'd be pretty hard to say no after that. and pretty toxic for your relationship with your neighbors shortly after. Oh, nice. Oh, did he catch you with the same trick? Yeah. So here's the thing. I think it's quite normal. It's probably even something God has wired on the inside of us deliberately, but it must never become obsessive. So Jesus knows that obsession is unhealthy and unhelpful. And so he teaches, in fact, that's what the story is all about. It's Jesus saying to his people, there's something that's fine. We all want that. We want to be invited to the dinner. He was acknowledging the human desire there to be honored. Even the tail end of the story is you'll be brought to the front and people will say, oh, look who's here. So he knows that that's in all of us. So don't pretend that Jesus doesn't know and your person sitting to your left and your right doesn't. Everyone here wants to be noticed, made to feel special and important. But he says it can be unhealthy and unhelpful. And so he says any system that feeds that, including a pecking order system, including social media, including all of these other things that exist in our lives at the moment, he says, tread very carefully. In fact, Jesus in some ways is saying the following. If where you sit at a dinner table defines who you are, well, that's pretty sad. You get that? That's out of that text. He's going like, if that's the sum of your self-worth, that's pretty sad. I think if our self-worth is fed by external things, it's dangerous. We become susceptible to the manipulative power of pride. All of us. I'm not standing here as a gallant victor in this. I'm standing here as a pilgrim telling you that this thing doesn't leave any of us alone for very long. We're all susceptible to it. He says that this thing, the upward spiral of self, it's pride. Really, that's what it is. And it is an upward spiral. And we get caught in it. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever been played like this? Someone uses flattery, makes you feel important. Have you noticed that in some ways you're now more inclined to what that person says in the future? It's a weird thing. And it's an upward spiral. But actually, Jesus says just old-fashioned pride. Upward spiral of self. It's really just pride. Let me give you a quick snapshot of what God thinks of pride. I can tell you this. He's blunt. Here's what God thinks of pride. For the proud will be humbled. Here's what God thinks of pride. Quite simple. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior and perverse speech. Next proverb. The Lord despises pride. Be assured, the proud will be punished. From the book of James, God opposes the proud. 3 quick verses there. God hates, despises, punishes, and opposes pride. Safe to say, he's not a fan. Safe to say, God thinks this is something very dark. I would go as far as to say, and when I studied in the week, I was having a close look at those words. You know what it is? He thinks pride's repulsive. Utterly repulsive. Something about it that he rejects outright. Makes me wonder, what is it about him and us that makes God have such strong views on pride? Hate is strong. Hate. God opposes the pride, punishes. He's repulsed by it. Here's some of why he thinks it's such a bad thing. I'm going to give you 2 quotes from 2 old men because we can learn much. from those who've gone before us. The first quote's from Augustine. He said this about pride. God being God offends human pride. If God is running the universe and has first claim on our lives, then guess who isn't running the universe and who doesn't get to have things as they please? It's like he was here yesterday. It's like he's been watching me all along. Let me read it one more time and try and catch the essence here. He says, God being God actually offends human pride. So when we're resting, why does God dislike it so much? Here's the answer. It offends God, our human pride. Because if God is running the universe and has first claim on our lives, then guess who isn't running the universe and doesn't get to have things as they please? The next quote from C.S. Lewis. He said the following, and I hope this image sticks with your mind. A proud man is always looking down on things and people. And of course, as long as you're looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. I like that quote, and I want to use it as a hook in your mind for a few moments as I just try to make a case for something I think God feels strongly about. I think part of the reason why God feels so strongly about this is because pride blocks our appreciation of God. That's what he says there. When you're always looking down on people and things from a lofty, self-imposed, lofty position, it means you can't look up. So, if I have to live my life like this, it's very annoying. In fact, I can't even do it for the purposes of this illustration. That's how bad it is. He's saying there that in the same way that pride blocks our view of God, it's like living our lives like this and trying to go about a productive, healthy life. Do this later, not when you're driving home, some other point when it's safe. Just try to spend 1 minute with your hand nice and close and see how annoyed and frustrated you become. Because we weren't designed to live like this. And I think what the Bible is teaching, and the reason God hates pride so much, is that the unchecked spiral of self, what it does is it sets ourself up like this, right in front of our eyes. It blocks our view of three very important things. It blocks our view of God, firstly, as Augustine said there. Pride blocks our view of God. A perpetual view of ourselves blocks our view of God. I think this is true. Second thing it does, it blocks our view of others. Can't see anyone else. I become wrapped up in my own life, my own concerns, my own challenges, my own victories even, but it's all still just me. And the more I live with my life in front of me like this, the less I can see others. And of course, the other thing is it just generally blocks our view of ourselves even. Quite bizarrely, looking at myself so much, I don't often get an accurate view of who I am because I'm almost too close to see it. Sounds a little bit philosophical and you can question it, but I found it to be true of me. If I become completely wrapped up in myself, if I think too much about something about myself, I can miss other things about myself. And so the whole picture that I'm meant to be seeing of who I am and who I'm becoming can become reduced to only what I'm viewing about myself and believing about myself right there in that moment. With me? Is this making sense? To just like one or two? Okay, 3, 4, 6, 8. Whoa! It's a revival. Pride or the upward spiral of self blocks our appreciation of God in the same way that my hand is blocking my view of the world. And it's debilitating. It's utterly debilitating. Jesus warns that the upward spiral of self is no small thing. Human pride is not only debilitating, it is dark and spiritually destructive. And here's the reason why it's so successful, is that pride is sinister and it is dark. But here's its key, and here's why Jesus taught on it so often. It's subversive. You don't necessarily see it in yourself. Anyone else find it easier to spot pride in others? Like, this message is teetering so much, you're not even sure what you should agree to anymore. Like, if I say that, am I being proud of my humility? And what does that mean about me as a person? I don't even know anymore. All I know is this: pride is a universal problem. It is dark, it is sinister, it hides in the dark recesses of all of us, and it's not good. It's spiritually toxic, in fact. I was going to tell you the story now about a salesman, but I see that story jumped the queue. The upward spiral of self is debilitating, and we must guard against it in practical and everyday steps. Okay, let's get onto the solution side of it. Right now, I've basically told you that we're all prideful. We all have this tendency. It's bad. We live like this. It's non-productive for ourselves. It destroys our view of God. It erodes our healthy self-confidence, actually, and it blocks us from viewing the world and life. How nice is this rain? I feel like people are applauding. I feel like, shh. I'm so encouraged. It's quite staggering. The upward spiral of self, though, is debilitating. We must take practical steps. Here's what James said. I read this verse earlier, that God opposes the proud. But the second thing it says in that same verse, I deliberately left the second half off. God opposes the proud, but he gives favor to the humble. Because the answer to pride is not merely to not be proud. Because then you can become proud of not being proud, which is the great irony of pride. The key to overcoming pride is to embrace regular, daily, practical steps of humility, I think. That's why Jesus said, don't get up at this meal and say, those of you who are sitting close to the host, what are you up to? You're just trying to be important so you can get him. Don't make this a soapbox thing. You just take a practical step. The next time you go in, don't go to the head of the table. Even though you might have to fight the flow. That's the thing. You might have to fight the flow to get to, because everybody's heading upstream to the main, everybody wants to sit there. He said, just go a different way. Do a different thing. Go against the flow. Take a daily practical step. I don't want to give you hundreds of examples, but I do want to ask the Spirit of God to speak to us here today. What is the practical daily step I can take to advance myself in the practice of humility? What can that look like? I'll give you this while you think what you could do. Famous quote, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. It's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. When we live wrapped up in ourselves, we have no ability to look up because we're always looking in. Our view is blocked and our perspective is hampered, much like that hand in front of the eyes. This verse is intriguing, though. It says God opposes the proud, but gives favor, or another translation says he gives grace to the humble. What is that? What does God give to humble people that he doesn't give to proud people that is a good thing? I give you this as my understanding of the answer. I believe the favor that God releases upon the humble is the glorious ability to freely and joyfully look up, to look around, and to look inwardly honestly. I believe the gift God gives the humble is to take away the hand, to go, I can see God now. I believe this, that as long as we are trapped in pride, as long as we are trapped in that upward spiral of self, we block our view of God. And one of the best things God has ever done for me, and I trust him to do for me regularly, is to deliver me from selfishness, to deliver me from living like this, because this is awful. Try it when you get home. Right now, you haven't tried it yet. You don't know how bad it is until you try it. And I think part of what God does for his people who embrace a life of humility is he takes away this thing. And suddenly that which we've become accustomed to is gone, and we live spectacularly free. It's a beautiful thing to live like that, to not care what others think about you, because you're so settled in who God says that you are. That's grace, that's favor. You might think, yeah, I would prefer financial blessing. Trust me, it doesn't matter how much financial blessing you have when you live your life like this, because none is ever enough. This is a miraculous thing God offers to his people. When Jesus teaches this different way of humility over that, folks, we've got to believe that Jesus has our best interests at heart, and we will thank him for it one day. Closing note, because I think this is true. When it comes to pride, if I tell you, picture the most proud person you can think of, or an example of a proud person, somebody who you think, like, that person is the epitome of this bad pride. Sometimes we celebrate them. We call it swagger. But actually, when we talk behind their backs, now they're just obnoxious and proud and arrogant. But here's the thing. Let's get to that phrase again. Oh, not that one. No, it is here. The upward spiral of self, this issue with pride, I think this is important for us to realize before we close, that it affects simultaneously those for whom the problem is excessive self-confidence. That's our usual default. We go like, no, I can see that. It's excessive self-confidence. Hubris is another fancy word to call it. That would be the upward spiral of self. However, a debilitating self-doubt, I believe, is similarly, it comes from the same roots. It is the same thing. It's still the hand in front of the face. I'm still obsessed with myself. I still have an upward spiral of self. It may be that I think too highly of myself. It may be that I think too low of myself. Either way, I'm thinking too much of myself. And I'm putting this pride thing here. And sometimes it's hard to see. I think most people struggle with the second one more than the first one. I'll tell you me. I think in my dealings with people and in my dealings with this people here, I think it's that second one that's a bigger challenge. But it's still the same thing. Still thinking too much of ourselves, or thinking of ourselves too much. A person wrapped up and obsessive in their insecurities is as blinded by self as a hubris person is. I'll say that one more time and then we'll work towards closing in prayer. A person wrapped up and obsessive in their insecurities is as blinded by self and as prone to pride as any hubris person is. I guess it's this. If this is excessive self-confidence, it's blocking my life, it's debilitating. Actually, the other one, it's just a different kind, but it has the same effect. It still blocks us off to seeing God properly, seeing others properly, and indeed seeing ourselves properly. God longs to set us free from the upward spiral of self so that we can see Him and others and ourselves more clearly and more joyfully. With that, the rain has stopped. I just want to ask you this question. If God feels so strongly about this, ought we not to think about it at least now for a moment or two? If this thing is as debilitating as trying to live our lives like that, and it can be that we have excessive self-confidence or excessive self-loathing, either one has the same one. If we feel so strongly about it, ought we not at least now to give the Spirit of God a chance to touch our hearts and say, this is you, let me help you. I'd like to close like that this morning. I'd like us to sit and just actually reflect, bring our lives before God. If you're here with your spouse, I'd ask you to release their hand now, because this really is a moment between you and God. And let's bring our own hearts before Him in prayer, in reflection, and then I'll close shortly after that. Let's pray. Loving Father, we do come before you now, as it says here on the wall, in humble obedience to your word. Lord Jesus, you taught a group of people much like us, with the same prone weaknesses that we do. You said to them, hey, go a different way on this thing. Don't go that way, go this way. And so, Lord, I feel like this morning you certainly have challenged me. And I believe that you're challenging others here this morning. That if we've got ourselves into a space of an upward spiral of self, just self taking too much of our head space, too much of our heart space, we're a bit, I guess, too into ourselves. I ask now that since it's so repulsive to you, and since you love us so very much, and since you so desperately want to set us free, I pray that now you would speak to us in our individual hearts about this issue. Holy Spirit, come now. We're giving you some time here now to speak to us. And we're asking humbly, Father, that you would do so, because we're asking you in the name of the one who taught us this, in the name of Jesus. Let's hang around here for a while.